Alright, today we're going to do an interesting take on the Should You Read video concept, where we're going to discuss 4 books that are related, but not because they're in a series, and that's the Sanderson Secret Project books. They're all out, I have read them all, and here is my spoiler-free Should You Read these books. And that's why it's a little weird, because it's like, yes, I'm reviewing multiple books like I do in my Should You Read series, and some of these are in like the same series as in the Cosmere, but in all of these books are not connected to each other. So that's where it's a little different. So I think I'm going to go through each book and discuss how I felt about it one way or the other. I don't know if I'm really going to answer the question of was this worth it or not. I've been a Sanderson fan for a very, very long time, so I think this was kind of fun. It was pretty fun. I think it was interesting getting to do it while on the bookish internet. I do think this is like I've learned with the secret projects that my reading of Sanderson is not something I don't mind sharing on the internet, but it's not something that I really like feel value in critiquing or reviewing, because most people generally know if they do or don't want to read his stuff. And I just don't feel like that's why people come to my channel. They don't come to hear about super popular things from me. But as a Sanderson fan and as someone who's read these works, I figured this is a good video to be like, here's what I thought. Do you want to pick these up? So yeah, we'll just go in chronological order. And we have Tress in the Emerald Sea. This is the first one. And I think this one is probably the one that's best received by the most people. That's been my vibe on it. And I mean, I think part of it is it's got, fairy tale retelling structure that I think is very cozy. You have a really sassy narrative voice, which I think always lands well for people. It's like unique-ish for Sanderson, so it's like, ooh, I get something new. I do remember that this one made me the most excited when I opened it, because I'm like, what? I'm getting a fairy tale? That's so cool. I love fairy tale things. Like, adult fairy tales are one of my favorite things, and this reminded me a lot of Stardust, which is one of my favorite movies. So I really liked this one. My biggest issue with Trust in the Emerald Sea is because of the narrative device of using a character to tell the story, the main character felt a little too distant from me. I wanted to be closer to Tress. I wanted to not be told as much about how Tress was thinking and reacting and responding. I wanted to be a little bit more in her head. And I think that's just one of my complaints, just because I really liked her. I thought she was a great problem solver. I thought she had great ambitions. I really liked how she evolved in the story, but I just think it would have been elevated for me and my taste if I was closer to her. That said, if you like a mid-weight, nice little adventure time that has a lot of the beats you see in fairy tales, but it's definitely made for like all ages, like it's definitely one of those classics that works for whoever is consuming it sort of thing, I think you should pick it up. Some people, I think that this doesn't work as well if you don't know the Cosmere. I don't necessarily agree. But that's because I just have so many people in my life who pick up and put down different parts of the Cosmere, and I can tell that they're still having a good time even if they don't know the intricacies of investiture, if that makes sense. So I think this is definitely very enjoyable, even if you're not steeped in the Cosmere. And I think it's also extra cool if you are in the Cosmere, because there are slight Easter eggs and things that you're just like, what? What does that even mean? It gives you questions that one day we'll get answers for, and that's always been the appeal of the Cosmere, for me at least, is not necessarily having the answers, but getting some answers and then always having more questions. It's kind of his cliche line of there's always another secret. That's how it's always felt. Like, how open it is now compared to how it was in like 2011 is wild to me when I think back on it. But I think this is like one of the most balanced books in terms of, yeah, anyone can probably pick this up, have a really good time, because it has familiar tropes, it has familiar arcs for characters, it has really climactic scenes that just make you want to fist pump. But it also, I do think, is written with Cosmere fans in mind. Like, if you are aware of the intricacies of certain parts of things, you're going to be like, what just happened there? What does that mean? When are we going to flesh that out? I didn't even know we could do that. I didn't know that creature existed. Oh, that's a nice callback to X. But all of those things are just tiny details, very similar, I feel, to how the Cosmere was back before we got to like Oathbringer or Rhythm of War, where things really started to get connected. The next book is not a Cosmere book. This is the not a Cosmere book. Wizard's Guide. Frugal Wizard's Guide to something. I don't know. This is my least favorite. Hands down, did not vibe with it. Part of that is it's written in first person. I'm not a Sanderson first person. Oh, that was a sentence. I think because his young adult has been primarily written in first person, it's been a struggle for me. And I think this really solidified it, because for a while I was like, do I just not vibe with how Sanderson internalizes young adult character thoughts. And then I just realized, no, it's just first person. I think when Sanderson writes first person, he approaches it with brains are unique and weird and have eccentricities that are repetitive. And I think that's true, but I don't like reading it that way. It's like, what is reality and what is my reading experience? And every character he's ever written in first person has a repetitive quirk that bothers me to no end. If you've read Reckoners, that was David's metaphor. Spensa is a little bit too much her own hype woman on the melodrama for my taste, but she's the least bad of the bunch. And then this guy could not stop rating things like he was a Yelp website. And there is slight payoff for all of these characters and their quirks, but not enough for me to get over how annoyed I was early on. And then on top of that, it's kind of based off the type of sci-fi that I just don't love reading all that often. It's very amnesia, fish out of water character. And then it's also, Sanderson has this archetype of a character who doesn't believe in themselves, doesn't believe that they deserve XYZ, and they need to discover that they actually do deserve it. And it's like sort of a mental health journey. And sometimes those characters land for me. And in this case, I can't even remember his name. Was his name Jason? Jace? Jake? I don't even know. I didn't care about him. And part of the story was caring about him, right? Like, he had an arc. He went on an arc. I should have cared. I didn't. I think the idea was fun, relatively unique, not that interesting to me. I won't say too much in case you really don't want to know, like, the concept of what it is. I don't like the long title. I think it's a little bit too much trying to be hitchhikers, and I haven't read Hitchhikers, but, like, let's be real, you're not hitchhikers, right? Like, that's not how this works. And I also just didn't think the character dynamics with the people he met along the way were really believable. They didn't, like, stick with me. Like, there's a particular character he spends a lot of time with. I don't remember her name. I don't understand why their relationship develops the way they do. It just really, in every way, felt so weird to me. And I've read Sanderson's sci-fi. I've read Legion. I've read Snapshot. I've read a lot of his adult works that are not Cosmere. And I just like those more. And I think part of that is Legion is more unique for me, and it was shorter. This was pretty short, but, like, overall, this one was not worth it for me. I finished it because the audiobook was short. And, the book is stunning. I did hear that there's, like, a story within the art, so I might actually flip through and do that one day. I haven't done it myself. The third one is Yumi and the Night Painter. This one is one of those that I think is getting more positive buzz, but I think this would be harder to read if you don't know the Cosmere. Maybe not impossible, but it definitely, I think, it helps if you know some things so that you're not completely lost with what's happening. But aesthetically speaking, super cool world building. Really liked the aesthetics of the world building in terms of how these two planets kind of function differently between the dark side and the one that has, like, the super hot planet. Like, I really like when Sanderson messes with ecosystems. So if you like when Sanderson messes with ecosystems, that's really here. A part of the world building that really didn't work for me in this one is that most of the time, obviously when people make world building, they are basing a lot of their cultural world building on things that we know. Very rarely is someone making a culture from scratch. But at the same time, this is the first time Sanderson is truly lifting from, like, I think it's a hodgepodge of Korean and Japanese culture. I don't know for sure, because the actual cultural world building is very, like, painted on, I guess, for lack of a better word. It's aesthetic. It's based off clothing and food. It's really not based on what makes cultures unique, which is how people interact with each other. It's about how they portray themselves, and I just find that lazy. It's not, like, bad, but in a world where I've read so many other books with cultural world building where they really think about how people interact with each other and why they do what they do, why are there X traditions, etc. This just really showed me that, like, in general, I really like Sanderson's magic, his, like, physics rules, his environments, his ecosystems. But when it comes to his people-people interactions, there's, like, usually a cool idea or two. But once you get, like, a couple inches below that surface, it's just not really as good. And this one really showed that to me. I really liked Yumi. The other character, the Nightmare Painter, took me forever to, like, vibe with. Because, again, similar to Wizard's Guide, this is a character who is down on himself and doesn't believe in himself, and he's done something wrong in the past that we'll learn about because he is bad. Like, I don't know, there's an archetype that obviously Sanderson was really feeling like exploring when he wrote these in 2020, and it's one that he's continuously explored in his other works too. So I just think that here, because I've been reading so many of them back to back, it's really stood out. But yeah, I think it was fun. It was fun for me. There was a time in the middle where it was reminding me of how much fun I had reading Warbreaker, and it was just like, oh, this is so cool, potential new favorite Sanderson, but it kind of petered off. Like, I lost steam with it, and it was good, but it wasn't great for me. So that's Yumi. I think it's super fun if you're a Sanderson fan. I just don't think it's the strongest for me. It's probably my second to least favorite. And then we have the most recent one, which is probably my personal favorite, but I think it's only going to be a favorite for like Cosmere geeks and nerds and everything, and that is The Sunlit Man. And this is the one that we were all kind of warned, you know, you probably need to read Stormlight to really appreciate this book. The rest of them, hypothetically, you didn't have to read anything else. You could just read them. This one, yeah, I mean, I would be so curious to see what someone thinks if they just read this book in a vacuum, because it assumes you know things. Let's just put it that way. It really does. And the main character, and I won't give away who they are, but they're a character you've met before, which is really cool. I spent a lot of the book being like, I know who you are, and I know eventually this book will spell it out for me, but I'm not going to go onto the 17th shard and figure it out, right? I was just going to let it happen, because I'm not the best at keeping track of the Cosmere knowledge. I'm not as good as Bookborn. If you don't know her channel, which I'm sure you do, she has so many subscribers, but she does the great videos of like everything you missed, the Cosmere Easter eggs for all the Sanderson stuff. It's very cool. But for me, I'm more casual about it. If I notice it, super cool. If I don't notice it and someone mentions it in a forum or a video, also cool. I don't put too much extra work into it. I'm more into like, how does the physics of this work? Which, if you haven't seen my Rhythm of War spoiler vlog, I had so much fun trying to figure out how the fake physics was working, and I was actually right a few times. It was super cool. But anyways, back on track for this. This one, I think, both worked for me because it felt nostalgic to me. This felt like a Cosmere book. This felt like, oh, I'm reading one of like the early Mistborn books, or maybe early Stormlight book, but it was also meshed with the fast-pacedness that all of these novels have had. All of these have been really fast-paced works. None of these really let you sit in it. And I think part of that is all of these are shorter than what Sanderson normally writes, so he's really getting to the point. And I think that pairing generally worked for me and made it I had more emotions in this book than I did other ones. Let's just put it that way. And the planet is so cool. Like, so again, I love cool planet stuff. I love learning about the Cosmere. I haven't learned this much about the Cosmere since like Emperor's Soul and Mistborn Secret History. Like, so fun. I was just like, oh, that's so cool. And like how, you know, trying to imagine where this book fits into the Cosmere's timeline. Absolutely wild. And then the story itself, like, even though it's fast-paced, I actually felt like we focused on a few enough people that I got to like have an intimate connection to what was happening, which I think is important since connection was a big part of this book, in terms of themes and magic and all of that stuff. So this one, I was apprehensive for the first couple chapters, A, because I picked it up when I was kind of really anxious, but B, the main character, again, kind of self-deprecating humor, kind of down on himself, blah, blah, blah. But he actually grew on me, and his way of being done reminded me more of how Sanderson had done it in the past with other characters. So because of, I think, that nostalgic connection, it worked better for me. So all that to say, these are my spoiler-free thoughts on all 4 of these books. I had a good time. I mean, I think if you're a Cosmere fan, you have to read the Cosmere books. I don't think anyone has to read Wizard's Guide unless you're truly like, what is Sanderson doing when he's not writing young adult or Cosmere? But I also think there are better works like Legion and Snapshot. I just think there are better things that Sanderson's put out in that type of like headspace. But that said, if you like things like Project Hail Mary or The Martian, I think you could like that book. I just thought it was aggressively the most okay thing I have ever read from Sanderson. And everything else, none of these were new favorites for me in the Cosmere. And I think part of that is something I like about a Sanderson book is how stupidly slow-paced it is at the beginning, and then how it ramps up to an explosive ending. And sometimes I don't like how predictable that is, but my favorite books are where you get to sit in it. Well of Ascension, a near perfect book. Most of that book is sitting around and waiting for things. Love it. And so I think these books, because they are more plot driven, because they are faster paced, that's like the one connecting tissue for all of these. It just doesn't, they don't work as well for me. They're 4.5 stars, but none of them are 5 stars. So, you know, take that as you will. I'm glad they exist. I don't hate that they exist. It was fun for me, especially Sunlit Man. That, because I'm supposed to start rereading Way of Kings soon, and I'm like, ooh, and I need to reread Arcanum Unbounded soon, and Emperor's Soul, and it has me really excited because it's just like, oh, the connections, all the little things, because again, I'm just a nerd about this Cosmere. I've always been, and so I love when I'm given some answers and many, many questions. So those are my spoiler-free thoughts. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them down below. If you have any opinions, spoiler-free, you can leave them down below. And if you just want to leave an emoji to let me know you're here, leave like a comment or a star or a galaxy type emoji. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.